Let's take a look at JavaScript in its simplest form on a web page. Here in our project, let's go ahead and open up the index.html that we were working with in the last module. Down near the bottom, we'll create a new element called script. Script requires that you tell it what type it is, and in our case, that is text/JavaScript. We're going to have a script that is going to contain JavaScript code. And in here, we can simply write some JavaScript. So the var keyword is going to start the creation of a new variable. I'll just call that L, and I'm going to dive into the page itself. I'm going to go look at the HTML document by looking at the document object. You can see we're getting some IntelliSense here. The IntelliSense in JavaScript inside of Visual Studio is good. It's not great, but it's good. You're going to get IntelliSense in a lot of cases, but not in every case. It's a little different than if you've used C# and you're used to the really rich IntelliSense we're getting with C#. This is going to help us out, but it's not going to be perfect. And I'm going to call a method called getElementById. This, unsurprisingly probably, is going to allow us to get an object on the page someplace that has a particular ID. And it returns that object that represents that live part of our page directly to the code. If you remember, up here in the sidebar, we have this span that has the username in it. Let's go ahead and give it an ID. And let's call that just username, all lowercase. And down here in the code, I'll just say go get that object called username. Now that I have this element, I can do a number of different things in looking at assigning classes, setting styles, all sorts of little things I could do with it in this sort of raw form. But instead, I'm going to replace the text that's inside of that span with what I want the text to be. And so I'm going to set inner HTML. This will actually let me set the HTML content of that span, since it can contain any sort of HTML. In my case, I'm just going to go ahead and add text, and I'll go ahead and just put my own name in there. If we run this page now, we'll see that the name has been replaced. Now, the interesting part of this isn't that we couldn't have just simply put the name into the markup ourselves, but that we actually did have code execute and run to perform this task. Now, we could have had this task performed based on the user doing something, some code coming from a server. We could have done this task based on reacting to some other action on the page. This means that this markup, this HTML we've put together, is really describing the structure of a page that we can manipulate at runtime. And that starts to be the power of what web development can really do, is it can change and mold and manipulate the DOM in reaction to users using your page. And that can be a very important and powerful idea. If we go ahead and look at the HTML page, you may wonder why I put the script at the bottom. And I did this because the way that browsers consume an HTML page is it starts at the top, and as it parses it, as it reads it top to bottom, it is taking the pieces that are involved here and constructing this document. Scripts are a little different in that when it constructs this part of the document, it actually tells the JavaScript parser, ooh, this is JavaScript, please parse this for me. And so there's an order that matters here. On slower devices and slower machines, getting to this piece of script helps us guarantee that this is not going to happen until this has already been read in by the parser. Because the JavaScript itself isn't going to wait until the HTML page is ready unless we do something to tell it to wait until it's ready. But by default, this will execute after everything above it has been already parsed. And so you increase the likelihood that this code is going to execute after we already have the element on the page. We'll see some techniques for ensuring that it happens late enough that the page has always been constructed correctly. But putting scripts on the bottom is a best practice. It's a common occurrence to make sure that they execute after most of the HTML page has been constructed by the browser. The problem here is that if we construct scripts directly on the pages themselves, there's no way to reuse them. There's no way to create reusable parts of JavaScript that multiple pages could potentially use for themselves. And so typically we're not going to create the HTML on the pages themselves, but separate them again, much like we did with CSS, into their own folder and files. Over here on the left, I'm going to go ahead and right-click on www-root and create a new folder that I'm going to call JS for JavaScript. Again, the names of these folders aren't as important as their existence. I'm going to use my Shift F2 technique to create a new file, and I'll call it our site.js. It's going to be a blank JavaScript file. I always like to start it with a comment and the name of the file so that it's a little easier for me to know it's there. And let's take from the HTML page the contents of what we were going to do. I'm going to just cut it and paste it into our site.js. And now that we have JavaScript code on our site.js, let's go ahead and add it here by using the source attribute. This will allow us to bring in this file and request it from the server and get it and then apply it on this page. It'll be parsed once it's been downloaded across the wire, just like any other resource that your page needs. We go back to the browser and let's just refresh. We can see this still works even though it's pulling the JavaScript from a secondary file. Still loading it, executing the JavaScript, which of course changes our name from the normal name over to my name temporarily. So now we've seen how to take JavaScript, create it inside the project, and then have a reference to it inside of our HTML pages, and we can see that that all works. Let's delve into events next.